Welcome to another edition of Octagon Outlook here on the Line Movement YouTube channel. I am James Lynch. Thanks so much for tuning in. We got a lot to talk about today. So much has happened and so much is coming up this week on this civic holiday here in Canada. So all my fellow Canadians out there, hope you're enjoying the day off. To my Americans, hope you're enjoying Happy Watermelon Day, I believe it's what it's called. So definitely hope you're getting your slices of watermelon today. Let's start first with UFC Vegas 5, obviously the card we just had on Saturday. Nutty card. I mean, let's be honest here. Let's talk about all the changes first off before we even dig into this card here. 10 changes on this card in total. I'll just go over some of them here. Obviously, we had Marcus Perez supposed to be taking on Eric Spicely. Eric Spicely has a failed weight cut. They tried to get Perez a new opponent. That opponent could not make weight. There were some issues there, so that fight ends up getting scrapped. Of course, the original main event was Holly Holm and Irene Aldana. Aldana tests positive for COVID-19, or her team did. That main event's off. It's rescheduled to October. We had Trevin Giles and Jung Young Park. It was supposed to happen. Park couldn't get into the country. They switched the fight up with Kevin Holland. Trevin Giles is walking to the cage. He faints. Game over. So they had to pull the fight from that as well, too, which was crazy thing that happened there to Trevin Giles. And obviously, I know Trevin quite well. Interviewed him long before he was in the UFC. Hopefully, he's doing okay after everything that happened. Ed Herman was supposed to be taking on Gerald Meerschaert. Gerald Meerschaert comes back okay as far as his COVID test up until fight time, and then he ends up having to pull out of that fight with Ed Herman due to COVID-19. Interesting, the UFC tried to put Kevin Holland against Ed Herman. Ed Herman's like, I'm out of here. I'm not fighting. So he ends up leaving. I'm actually trying to get in touch with Ed this week to get an update on that, but pretty crazy circumstances with that. And too bad for Kevin Holland, who was supposed to fight on this card as well. We also had the Viviana Araujo was supposed to fight Jennifer Maia on this card. Joanne Calderwood ends up stepping in. So that was a bit crazy as well, too. Just a lot of switch up. Ray Borg having to pull out of this fight. He ends up getting replaced against Nathan Manus as well. Tamir Valiev was supposed to fight on this card. Just a lot of crazy things that happened, and just a lot of crazy things that happened in the last 48 hours. I can't remember a card that had so few fights in it. I think it was 8 fights total on a UFC event. So that in itself was just crazy in itself. But in this COVID world, it's bound to happen. I mean, this is the first card that I can think of where they had so many changes due to a lot of COVID-19 stuff. But let's start in the main event. We talked about it last week on the show. Derek Brunson, Edmund Shabazian. This was the test for Edmund Shabazian to see where he fit in the division, and Edmund Shabazian failed that test, in my opinion. Derek Brunson, all the credit to him, not taking anything away from that performance. He looked great on Saturday. That first round, pretty close, but I thought Derek Brunson did enough to edge that one out. And then the second round is really where he took over. Shabazian's a guy who hasn't gone the distance a lot in his career. His debut against Darren Stewart, that's one that comes to mind where he did go the full 3 rounds, but this was a different animal, fighting a guy in Brunson who has really turned a corner. Let's not forget Derek Brunson, not that long ago, lost back-to-back fights to Jacare Souza and Israel Adesanya, and now he's on a 3-fight win streak, and this was by far his most impressive performance, going out there and using his stand-up. Now, let's talk about the finish itself, because that's where we're getting a lot of controversy as far as that goes. So at the end of the round, second round that is, Derek Brunson gets Shabazian to the ground, lays some shots out. Shabazian's laying flat. I mean, I'm thinking he's out. And I know the buzzer had rang, so to speak, as far as the round ending. Herb Dean steps in, checking on Shabazian. Now, Shabazian did get up, but that doesn't mean he wasn't knocked out. Let's not forget. It's kind of like being drunk. When you're drunk, you're kind of going off instincts. That's what Shabazian was doing, at least from my vantage point, as far as what happened. So he's out. The doctor looks at him. I'm pretty confident at this moment when I'm watching this that the doctor's going to say you can't fight. Shabazian's, showing a little bit of life, but they should have stopped the fight there. I had a really big issue with them not stopping the fight. I think anyone watching at home could tell that he was out and that he had been rocked. So I think that's just a very dangerous thing to do, is let a fighter go out. And it didn't matter, because when the third round started, Brunson went out there, finished Edmund Shabazian, hands him his first loss. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the future of Edmund Shabazian. I think people are being a little hard on him, but let's not look past what Derek Brunson did on Saturday night. This, to me, puts him in the contender spot in 185. I think there's a couple cool matchups you could do next for him, whether it's Jack Hermanson, who's coming off that big win over Calvin Gastelum his last fight. You could also do the fight with Darren Till, who just lost as well. So I think there's a lot of good options there for Derek Brunson in terms of his next fight and his next performance, because he's really turned a corner here. I think, you could have called him a gatekeeper for a while, and now for him to go out there and really take care of business, really, really, really big win there for Derek Brunson. And Shabazian, I have some ideas, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Co-main event. We got to talk about this. You got to feel for Joanne Calderwood in the co-main event. She took this fight despite having a title shot against Valentina Shevchenko in a fight that she was very confident she was going to win, and it did not go as planned. Jennifer Maia, where did this submission game come out of nowhere? Goes out there and submits Joanne Calderwood in the very first round, and some really serious news after the fight, Calderwood fainting. We got an update from her as well. She is doing okay, but obviously some scary stuff after this fight with her, fainting after the fight. We weren't expecting that. But Dana White now saying that Jennifer Maia is going to get the next title shot with this win over Joanne Calderwood. I kind of disagree with that. Just because of the fact that I know that Calder was supposed to fight for the title next, but she was coming off a loss to Caitlin Chukagian in the fight before that, a fight that I don't think she was winning at all at any point in the fight. So it just seems a little odd that they're going to give her the shot after this, but hey, I guess that's what they want to do. Flyweight's a bit messy right now as far as the rankings and everything. Personally, I think someone like a Lauren Murphy or Cynthia Calvillo deserves a shot over Jennifer Maia just because they've been on longer winning streaks, and especially Calvillo beating Jessica Ive just fought for the title. I think that holds more weight than a win over Joanne Calderwood, but that's the route they're going to go. And for Calderwood, it's just another list of disappointments for her in her career. I mean, I remember when she was on The Ultimate Fighter, people were expecting her to win the show, and that didn't end up happening. And then at 115, she had some setbacks. So just another unfortunate setback for Joanne Calderwood. I'm sure she'll be back, but you got to feel for her, right? Like, she had the title shot, and now she won't have it after losing this fight. Kind of reminds me of Jack Hermanson last year, where he looked like he was getting close to a title shot at 185. What does he do? Takes a fight with Jared Cannonier, ends up getting knocked out. So he's, taking a step back as far as that goes. So yeah, big win for Maia, and Calderwood back to the drawing board. Let's continue on with this fight. I mean, we were expecting nothing but violence, and that's certainly what we got in this welterweight fight between Vicente Luque and Randy Brown. Vicente Luque going out there and finishing the fight with knees and punches on Randy Brown. What's so impressive about this is the fact that Luque, this is a dangerous fight for him. I didn't think this was the right matchup for Vicente Luque going forward, because to me, he deserves a higher ranked opponent than a Randy Brown. I thought Jeff Neal would have made more sense, or someone like that who's at least ranked a little bit higher, at least positioned higher in the division. So Luque went out there, did what he does best, and gets a finish here. Randy Brown back to the drawing board. Luque, another big win here. I'd like to see him fight like another top guy going forward. He's only got 2 losses over the last couple of years, Luque, that is. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, which he lost in November, and then he also lost to Leon Edwards a few years ago. But this guy might be the most underrated fighter in the welterweight division. Definitely the dark horse for sure. So big win for him there, and excited to see what's next for him. And Randy Brown, just another setback for him, but I'm sure he'll go back to the drawing board after this one. And then opening up the main card, what an awesome rematch this was. Bobby Green, Lando Venata. It is Bobby Green coming out with the win this time. Their first fight was a draw. Green looked great in this fight. And how about him turning a corner over the last couple of years with him just, having some setbacks and some of those fights that he had against, Drakkar Klose and Francisco Trinaldo, to go out there and get a win the way he did over Lando Venata in a fight where, he needed to win to really show that he's still kicking in this division. He's only 33 years old, but, we often think of him as a veteran just because he, fought all the way back in Strikeforce and has some pretty solid wins overall. So for Green to go out there and get the win the way he did, I think he made a bit of a statement, to be honest, to show people that, hey, look, I figured things out. I'm now, back in the driver's seat as far as the lightweight division goes. So really big win for Bobby Green, who says he's going to pay off his house, which I think is awesome. Get him back in there as soon as possible. But this really stole the show as far as that goes, with Bobby Green getting the win there. Let's go over the prelims here. A couple notes to make note of. Obviously, Jonathan Martinez getting the flying knee knockout over Frankie Saenz in this fight. Martinez looked good, but we can't overlook the fact that he missed weight in this fight. Bad news. I'm curious to hear what happened. He hasn't really gone into detail, and I don't know if we'll ever get any details as to why he missed weight by so much in this fight, but it wasn't a little bit. I think he came in at 149. Let me just double check the weight there so I know what I'm actually talking about here. But it was a pretty bad weight cut. Yeah, it was 140.5, sorry, for a 135-pound fight. So that you can't miss weight by that much. So obviously having to give up some of his purse, but this was a good fight early on, and then Martinez just sort of took over. A younger guy, fighting a guy in Saenz who does not fight that often, 39 years old. This was sort of a tailor-made matchup for Martinez, who gets another finish. And he really needed a finish here. You remember the last fight against Andre Ewell did not go his way. A lot of people felt like he did do enough to win that fight. So for him to go out there and get a solid win like that really speaks volumes to his talent level. And another Factory X guy who's really looked good as of late. So big win there for Martinez, but he's got to make weight next time. That's the big thing here as far as his next performance. Let's continue with the bantamweight division. Nathan Manus getting the win over Johnny Munoz Jr. This was supposed to be Ray Borg and Manus. Borg pulling out of the fight. Manus looked good. A lot of people wondering how they scored this fight. It was a bit of a weird matchup. I think Manus ended up winning 29-27, but obviously some low blows and some other weird stuff that happened in this fight. But I thought Manus looked good. I mean, look, for a guy who had to go through an opponent change so close to fight time, fighting an undefeated guy, I thought this was a solid performance from him. I'd like to see both guys get like full camps. I know Manus had a pretty good camp for this, like heading in, but still, I'd like to see him with a little bit more time and see what he's made of. So big win there for Nathan Manus as he gets his first UFC victory, the former TKO champ. Let's talk about Jamal Emmers. This was a dominant performance over Vince Cachero. Cachero taking this on short notice. Emmers was supposed to fight. Who's he supposed to take on? Timur Valiev. And of course, Valiev could not take this matchup. So Emmers went out there, looked dominant in this fight, but let's call it what it is. He was fighting a bantamweight in Vince Cachero. Credit to Cachero. He hung in there. I think there was a couple times you thought this fight could have ended, but Emmers using his height and reach to his advantage. And I think he really did get the short end of the stick in his last fight against Chikadze at featherweight. So for Emmers to go out there and get a big win like that, I thought looked great. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Let's not forget, Corey Sandhagen has 2 losses in the UFC. One is in his last fight to Aljamain Sterling. The other one is actually to Jamal Emmers. A lot of people forget that. So Emmers a pretty exciting prospect at 145. And for Cachero, I'd like to see him with the full camp and fighting at bantamweight, his natural weight class. I think this guy is still very talented and, heart of gold as far as, the iron chin, I should say, as far as being able to take some of those shots. So really, good performance despite the loss for Vince Cachero. And opening up the card, this was a really crazy fight. Chris Gutierrez, Cody Durden, the newcomer replacing Luke Sanders, who had to withdraw from this fight, I believe, due to injury. Gutierrez, he almost got finished in this first round. Durden was in a very good spot. Looked like he was going to finish Chris Gutierrez. Gutierrez, survives the storm, so to speak, and ends up, in my opinion, winning the next 2 rounds. Now, here's the question about this fight I want to talk about quickly. So a lot of people scored the first round 10-8. That's why this fight ended up being a draw, because people felt like Durden did enough to get the 10-8 round. It's a little bit questionable because Gutierrez, I thought you could have almost given him a 10-8 in that third round, but I don't have an issue with the scorecard. I just think that is a little bit interesting where you do have a guy in Gutierrez who nearly finished Durden, it looked like, in the third round, whereas Durden nearly finished him in the first. So why are you giving one fighter a 10-8 and not the other one? That's what I found so interesting in this fight. But either way, I thought both guys looked very good in this fight. Gutierrez, he can't start slow like that again in fights. Otherwise, he's going to get taken advantage of. Luckily, he was able to survive the early onslaught from a Cody Durden. So Chris Gutierrez, like I said, still remains undefeated in his last couple of fights. And for Durden, there's rumblings he might go to flyweight. We'll see if he decides to do that. But I thought he looked good against a really solid guy in Chris Gutierrez. So either way, the American Top Team Atlanta product looked very good in his debut, and I'm excited to see what is next for him. So there's my recap of UFC Vegas 5. If you've got any comments on that, leave them in the comment section here of the YouTube channel, and I'll respond whenever I get the chance. Also, I wanted to go on a bit of a rant here. Edmund Shabazian, a lot of people, I'm saying this guy was overhyped. This guy, people are saying he was going to win the title and that, people shouldn't have overlooked Brunson. Look, the UFC did the right thing here as far as the matchups go. And I talked about this pre-fight where, Shabazian was going on the same trajectory as Israel Adesanya. If you remember, Israel Adesanya had a great fight with Brad Tavares, didn't finish him, went the distance, ended up getting Derek Brunson after, and Adesanya went out there and knocked out Brunson. Now, Shabazian knocked out Brad Tavares, fought Derek Brunson, ended up losing. But I don't think this is bad matchmaking or people, trying to make the argument that he was rushed too much. Edmund Shabazian is 22 years old. I'll repeat that again, 22. There's already people on my timeline on Saturday night saying this guy's done. He was never any good. He's very good. Trust me. It was a good learning lesson for him on Saturday night. And, the analogy I used on Twitter, and I'll bring it up again here, is this reminds me a bit of the Rory Mcdonald and Carlos Condit fight that happened years ago in UFC Vancouver. It was Rory Mcdonald's second UFC fight. And despite the fact that I thought he was winning that fight, he did end up getting finished in the third round, but it was a great learning lesson for Rory at that time, because when he lost that fight, I think he had a nice winning streak heading into that one. That was the fight that got Rory to go train at TriStar, and it changed his career. Of course, he really turned things around after going to TriStar and training with Firas Zahabi. I think this could be the same thing here for Edmund, where it's a good learning lesson that, look, what I was doing before isn't enough to get me to that next level. And the hope is that Edmund at least looks at potentially cross-training with another camp. He is a very loyal guy. He is coached by Edmund Tarvinian, the coach of Ronda Rousey. But, hopefully he does decide to take some extra looks and look at improving some things, because I think his cardio didn't look great. Now, granted, most of his fights end in the first round, but, in general, I think he needs to get a little bit more seasoning. But this was absolutely the right matchup for him. People who said he was rushed too soon or that he was overhyped, I disagree, because you don't just go out there in UFC 244 and get a first-round head kick knockout over Brad Tavares and expect him to fight, easy competition going forward. This was the right fight for him. Brunson, we didn't know where he fit in the division. We do now. Brunson is a contender. Shabazian, not a contender. He's got to get a bounce back fight next. And I know some people have already been talking about him fighting Calvin Gastelum or fighting, Chris Weidman if he wins this weekend. I disagree. Give him another fight to get his confidence back. You don't need to feed him to those guys. Give him an easier fight next time out and get his confidence back. And let's see where he goes from here, because I'm not writing this guy off. A lot of people are. I am not. He's 22. Lots of room for improvement. What were you doing when you were 22 years old? I guarantee you weren't knocking out Brad Tavares. So keep that in mind, that this guy has plenty of room to grow. And I think it's just a setback, but one that I think will make him a better fighter. So that's my thoughts on Edmund Shabazian. You guys got to quit being so hard on him. Great guy, and also a great interview too. So keep that in mind too, as you guys saw here on Live Movement ahead of this fight when we interviewed him. Let's get to UFC Vegas 6. Really great card coming up here on Saturday. We're not going to go through every single fight, and when we do these preview shows, we go through sort of the most important ones. But let's start first in the featherweight division. A bit of a switch up here. It was supposed to be Steve Garcia taking on Peter Barrett. Steve Garcia is out. Insert Yusuf Zalal, the Factory X featherweight standout, taking on Peter Barrett. So a couple interesting notes on this fight. First off, Barrett, if you're wondering why he hasn't fought since he won his contract on Contender Series, it's because Barrett wanted to fight at featherweight. He wasn't going to take a short notice lightweight fight. He knows he fights best at 145 pounds. So that's why he hasn't been in the cage for so long, but he has been training. I interviewed him recently. He's very much ready to go and ready to take this fight on. Zalal's a guy who's always staying ready, and he's already in Vegas because if you remember, he cornered his teammates Chris Gutierrez and Jonathan Martinez over the weekend. So he's already ready, set to go. Zalal, of course, coming off 2 really good wins in the UFC over Austin Lingo and most recently Jordan Griffin. So he's got a lot of momentum coming in this fight. He's fought a little bit more than Barrett heading into this fight as far as his last couple of performances. Zalal's a big favorite in this fight, and I do think the line's a little bit high, but I would say that Yusuf Zalal should win this fight. I think he's more talented. He's younger. He's a natural featherweight. And, Barrett, I know he says he fights better at 45, but he hasn't actually fought at featherweight since 2017. So let's hope he can actually make the weight. I'm sure he will, but that is a bit concerning. I would check out the weigh-ins if you guys are looking to bet this fight just to see where Barrett's at. But I've been more impressed by Yusuf Zalal. I think he's one of those guys, when you're watching his fights, you do see the makings of a potential contender. And I don't think you see that with Peter Barrett. Barrett's a tough guy. We saw that in the Contender Series fight. That's why he got the contract. He had some adversity in that fight, and he was able to pull out the win. So while I do think Barrett is a game opponent, I do like Yusuf Zalal in this fight. The question is, can he finish Peter Barrett? Barrett has been finished before. If you remember TJ Brown, who's now in the UFC, he finished Peter Barrett. There was a couple other fights where Barrett has been finished. So can Zalal knock him out? It's possible, but his last 2 fights have gone the distance. So I would take a look at Zalal inside the distance if you want some better value here. I do think he can finish Peter Barrett in this fight, but more often than not, I do like Yusuf Zalal with the pick. I think he goes out there and puts on a really great performance over a very tough opponent in Peter Barrett. So keep that in mind. Another interesting fight on this card, Justin James is going to be taking on Gavin Tucker. Justin James, the reason I say interesting is because this guy's fought as heavy as as heavy as welterweight, and now he's coming down to fight at featherweight. He actually hasn't fought at featherweight in a couple of years, and he's taking on a true featherweight in Gavin Tucker, a Canadian guy who I'm very familiar with. Tucker 11-1, and James is 15-4 overall, and he's a guy that is 16-4 overall. And James is actually the underdog in this fight. Gavin Tucker's the favorite, and I get that because Tucker has fought more at featherweight in his career. He's coming off a win in his last fight, but that win, if you watch his last fight that he had, which I believe it was at UFC Edmonton, he got hit in that fight, and that was a little bit concerning. And if you remember, Tucker had not fought in 2018 prior to that because he suffered that really big beatdown by Rick Glenn. You guys remember that fight, UFC 215? It was the Nunes-Shevchenko card. He got absolutely destroyed in that fight and ended up coming back and winning, but he still got dropped in that fight against Sungwoo Choi in the last fight. So I do have some concerns about Gavin Tucker's chin in this fight because James hits like a truck. You need evidence of that? Go watch his last fight. Short notice UFC debut against Frank Camacho. He knocked out Frank Camacho in the first round. James has looked very impressive. The concerning thing for James in this fight is, can he make the weight? I did speak to him recently. He tells me it's going to be a tough cut for him. Like I said, he hasn't fought in that weight class in a while. So that's a little bit concerning as far as him making the weight. Like he might miss weight in this fight, but he does pack a punch. And that's where I think he has an advantage in this fight. Now, as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Gavin Tucker in this one just because he's been a more seasoned guy at featherweight. And I think, the fact that he won't have as draining of a cut as Justin James, I think that plays to his advantage. But if Justin James makes weight, I would keep an eye out for the knockout prop as far as that goes, because that is very interesting because Justin James is a guy that hits like a truck, like I mentioned. And if he gets it on Gavin Tucker, he absolutely can go out there and take care of business. So as far as Justin James goes, I absolutely think he could knock out Gavin Tucker in this fight, but the pick would be Gavin Tucker as far as that goes, just because he's done a little bit more at featherweight, and that's something to keep in mind too as far as that goes. So give me Gavin Tucker with the pick. Let's keep things rolling along here. We're going to go to the welterweight division. We've got Tim Means taking on Staropoli. And right now, Staropoli is the favorite in this fight, heading into this one. And understandable, but Tim Means, obviously a game opponent, way more experience in this fight. That's one thing I do look at. Now, I did have the opportunity to speak to Tim Means, and he talked about that last loss against Daniel Rodriguez, a fight that he probably should have won. And he just talked about fighting angry, fighting too emotionally. He had some personal stuff going into that last fight. Really talked about how, he wasn't himself, and he was fighting angry. And every time you fight angry, it never turns out very well. So I think he's going to keep his emotions in check in this fight. And I actually do do like him here because Staropoli is the favorite, but I think with Means and his experience and the fact that, he's still getting good wins at his age, even at 36, I think that's something to definitely keep in mind as far as that goes, as far as Tim Means, going out there and taking care of business in this fight. So I actually like him here for the upset because Staropoli's only got 11 fights. Tim Means has 32 fights. That's a huge gap in experience. And I don't think Means is slowing down. I think he just had a bad last fight, but I think in general, he's still got the knockout power. He can still go out there and really live up to his nickname, the Dirty Bird, and make it a dirty fight. And I don't think Staropoli's been in a fight like that. So I think Tim Means is either going to knock out Staropoli or he's going to win a really hard fought decision in this one. But I do like Tim Means here as the underdog because I do see some value in him on just, having a lot more experience than his opponent. Let's get to the main card here. Let's go with Beneil Darius and Scott Holtzman at lightweight. A little bit of a surprising fight in the sense that Darius is a guy that, I think should be fighting a little bit higher caliber opponent, but I think it's just a case of they want to keep him active. And Holtzman, he's a game opponent. He's not an easy guy to finish, and he will make you work for that fight. I did have a chance to speak with Holtzman recently. He mentioned the fact that he's actually back home in Tennessee training. He's not at the MMA lab, so, not getting as much training as I'm sure he'd like, but still getting to work with pretty solid guys as far as his training camp goes, and including Dylan Calla, who's a pretty solid prospect on the regional scene. But he's taken on a guy in Darius who's really turned a corner since losing to Alex Hernandez. Darius is not only going out there and winning fights, but he's finishing opponents. I was so impressed in his last fight, not only beating Drakkar Klose, but actually finishing Drakkar Klose. Drakkar Klose had never been finished in his career, and Darius was able to do that in the second round of that fight. So a really good opportunity for him here, but I do think Darius is the better fighter. The question is, can he finish Scott Holtzman? Like I mentioned, Holtzman, a very game guy as far as that goes, as far as taking care of business. I think that's something to keep in mind in this fight. So does he go out there and finish Holtzman? I'd say probably not. I would be taking a look at Darius winning this fight by decision as far as the pick goes in the fight. But I do expect it to be a clear-cut decision for Beneil Darius, who I think just is the overall better fighter. A little bit younger. He's 31. Scott Holtzman, 36 years old. And Darius, like I said, a lot of momentum. Coming off finishes over Drakkar Klose, Frank Camacho, Drew Dober. I mean, how good does that Dober look win now with the run that Dober's gone on? Holtzman, nice win over Jim Miller earlier this year. But just, you look at the guys that he has wins over in the UFC. A lot of them aren't even in the UFC anymore, like Michael McBride, like Daryl Horcher. So I think Darius should win this fight, and I think he'll do so impressively. So give me Beneil Darius by decision. All right, interesting fight here in the women's bantamweight division. We've got Yana Kunitskaya taking on Stolarenko, and Stolarenko making her debut, coming over from Invicta. Yana Kunitskaya looking to bounce back from that loss to Aspen Ladner last fight. Kunitskaya is the favorite, and it's because she's fought in the UFC way more than her opponent. She's looked good. I mean, even in that loss to Aspen Lad, I thought Kunitskaya looked pretty good in that one. She did get finished in that fight, but I think that fight was pretty even heading into that third round, and she just ended up getting finished by an opponent in Aspen Lad who's younger and has a lot of really good power in her strikes. So a setback for Kunitskaya, but I see her taking care of business in this fight. Not going to do a huge breakdown in this one. Not only the experience, but just the level of competition as well that she's fought. Storenko did fight on the Ultimate Fighter, but she lost those fights. If you remember, she lost to Pani Kianzad. She lost to some of the other top fighters she's had to face. So Kunitskaya, I think, with the experience, with the fact that she's been more of a mainstay in the UFC, I think she'll get a decision in this one. I don't think she'll finish it, but I really like Kunitskaya in this fight because if you look at her losses, Aspen Ladd, Chris Cyborg, I mean, it doesn't get any tougher than that as far as opponents go. So give me Kunitskaya in this fight by decision. Let's move along to the middleweight division right now. We've got Darren Stewart taking on Mackie Pitolo, and right now Stewart's the favorite, but Pitolo's a guy, man. I'll be honest, I've been counting him out over the last couple fights, and he's really looked great over these last couple outings. Here's a guy that I think should probably fight at welterweight, but he's able to fight at middleweight. Why? Because he's got knockout power, and his nickname's Coconut Bombs, and he certainly lives up to that. He finished Charles Bird in his last fight. He finished Justin Sumter on Contender Series. He did lose the fight before that, after that, I should say, to Kalen Potter, but in general, Pitolo, very, very, very solid guy, but Darren Stewart's a very tough guy to finish, and here's a guy that, most of the time makes you work for your wins. Just go ask Edmund Shabazian in his debut. That was a split decision win for Shabazian, but Darren Stewart made him earn it for sure. And Stewart's finished fights himself, finished Eric Spicely, finished Charles Bird, coming off that loss in Cage Warriors in his last fight, but Stewart's still very dangerous and a very game opponent here. So what I think is going to happen in this fight is I think Pitolo is going to try and knock out Darren Stewart. And certainly we've seen him get submitted before, but we've never seen him get knocked out. And I think it's just a test to how durable Darren Stewart is as far as an opponent goes. So I see Pitolo trying to throw those bombs, being unsuccessful, and Stewart just being able to use his striking, use his wrestling, and being able to go out there and win a decision here. I don't see a finish in this fight. And if it is, it's probably going to go Pitolo's way. But I see Darren Stewart winning a decision and getting back on the winning track and showing the middleweight division why he's one of the most underrated guys in this division. I think he takes care of business here on Saturday and gets the decision victory over the Hawaiian, Mackie Pitolo. All right, let's get to the co-main event. Really, really, really intriguing fight. This is probably the most interesting fight to me on the entire card, maybe this whole weekend out of all the cards that are going on. We've got former middleweight champion Chris Weidman moving back down to 185 to take on Omari Akhmedov. And Weidman, I see, is the favorite now. I know initially Akhmedov was the favorite, but I think people are definitely betting up that line. But if you look at what Weidman's done in his career, obviously a lot of setbacks. Lost to Dominic Reyes in his last fight at light heavyweight. That's not a bad loss, though. You look at the losses before that. Jacare Souza lost to Yoel Romero. I mean, we're talking top fighters here. Gegard Mousasi, who's still doing quite well in Bellator. So it's really tough to say where Weidman fits in the division right now. And that's why they think this fight with Akhmedov is very interesting, because you've got a guy in Akhmedov who, nice win over Ian Heinisch in his last fight, but really, I think this is the most notable and maybe the most talented opponent he's fought so far in the Octagon. Now, I see a lot of chatter on social media, people saying Akhmedov's going to go out there and knock out Weidman. Weidman has no chin. Is it a case that Weidman has no chin, or is it a case of Weidman fighting just really good competition? It's tough to say. I want to remind everyone that the last pure knockout win that Omari Akhmedov has had was way back in 2013. So he's not a guy known for going out there and finishing his opponent. So I don't think he's going to go out there and knock out Chris Weidman, but I do think that he hasn't taken as much damage. He hasn't had the injuries that Chris Weidman has had. He's not 35 years old like 36, I should say, that Chris Weidman is. So he's got all those advantages heading into the fight as far as that goes. Now, Weidman, I think, is the better fighter on paper, but what type of Chris Weidman are we going to get in this fight? And if you guys watched here on Line Movement, we talked to Weidman last week. He's having a tough weight cut, and that's a bit concerning because he was supposed to fight Jack Hermanson earlier this year. That fight didn't end up coming through. Apparently, he was supposed to fight Edmund Shabazian and Yoel Romero. Those didn't come through either. And he's in the process of moving. So that's something as well to consider, that maybe the cut is going to be a little bit tough for him, because he does cut a lot of weight to get to 85. That's why he went up to 205 to test the waters. Did not go as planned. So he's back here now at 185. So that is a bit concerning here. And as we know, as we've seen time and time again, when fighters get up there in age and they're still cutting weight, they're more susceptible to the knockout. So could Akhmedov knock out Weidman? Possibly, but he's not known as a knockout guy. So I don't see him knocking out Weidman, but that's certainly very concerning here. So I think there is value here on Akhmedov right now as a slight underdog. I'm going to pick him in this fight just because he's done more at middleweight over the last couple of years and shown that he can actually go out there and win fights, as opposed to Weidman, who's been losing a lot of his fights. Even though I think Weidman is still fighting top competition, this kind of reminds me of Tyron Woodley when he fought Gilbert Burns. It's like, is Woodley losing a step, or is it the fact that he's fighting tough guys? We saw clearly that he lost a step when he fought Gilbert Burns. I could see the same thing here happening to Chris Weidman. Now, could we see Chris Weidman come out there and be like a vintage Chris Weidman and put on a great performance and win like he did against Calvin Gastelum? Absolutely. But I think more often than not, the older fighter, the more battle-tested, damaged fighter, so to speak, in Chris Weidman, I think generally does not win a fight like this. So I'm going Omari Akhmedov with winning this fight by decision and getting the job done as far as that goes. I'd love to see Chris come back and do it, but I just can't trust him at this point with the amount of stuff he's got to deal with heading into this fight with the weight cut and just taking so much damage and just not fighting that much. I mean, you look here, fought once in 2019, once in 2018. Twice in 2017, but he's really been missing a lot of time here. So I got to go with the younger fighter, Omari Akhmedov, to take a decision in this one. Let's get to the main event. This to me is pretty simple as far as the matchup goes. I mean, it could be very simple. It could be very complicated. We'll dig into this though here. Right now, Derrick Lewis is the favorite over Alexei Oleinik. Really interesting heavyweight fight. And, I can see why Lewis is the favorite in the sense that he's younger and he packs a punch. And that's kind of the way I'm thinking about this fight too. Despite the fact that Oleinik has looked great over the last couple of fights, especially that win over Fabricio Verdum, where he totally outclassed him, not even in just the ground game, but stand-up wise, Oleinik looked in great shape. He was able to go out there and take care of business. But if you guys watch an interview here on Line Movement with Oleinik, he said he had a slow start to his camp. And he was talking about how camp, the weight and everything was not like it was in the Verdum fight, at least early on. So that was a bit concerning to hear as far as that goes in this fight. But we know what Oleinik's going to do. He's going to try and take this to the ground. He's going to try and submit Derrick Lewis. Can he do it? It's possible. Daniel Cormier did that to Derrick Lewis. He took him to the ground. He submitted him. But Daniel Cormier, to me, a lot better of a fighter than Alexei Oleinik. So that's the question in this fight. Can Oleinik take Derrick Lewis down and submit him? I don't think he will. I think there's more of a chance in this fight that Derrick Lewis knocks out Alexei Oleinik over the 5 rounds, just with the fact that this guy has an absolute cannon of a shot. And I think he's put out a lot, other fighters in his career, as opposed to a guy like Oleinik, who's, Walt Harris has knocked him out. He's had other knockout losses over him, and Curtis Blades. There's been a lot of guys who've been able to knock out Alexei Oleinik, and I think Lewis will do that too. The only concern is I think Oleinik will be a little bit faster. So if he's able to avoid those shots and Lewis gets tired later on in the fight, like he did against Mark Hunt, that could potentially happen in this fight. But I think more often than not, all Lewis has to do is connect and get a knockout here, and I see that happening. So give me Derrick Lewis with the pick by knockout. I think he gets it done, and I think you'll see him skip Curtis Blades next, and probably fight for the title or close to it. Because I thought this was interesting when they made this matchup, because you notice they announced this fight before Curtis Blades and Alexander Volkov. I think they did that for a reason, because I think that's a terrible style matchup for Derrick Lewis against Curtis Blades in this fight. So I think you'll see him skip it. But if Olynyk wins, I think they do Olynyk against Curtis Blades next, because Curtis needs to fight and stay active. So that's my thoughts on the main event, which should be awesome. But like I said, I think Derrick Lewis goes out there and takes care of business. Now, guys, we have a Bellator card this Friday. We do. Not very well promoted. I'll get to that in a second after I talk about this card. But we've got a really awesome main event that's going to be pitting Michael Chandler against Benson Henderson in a rematch. A really exciting fight. Now, if you remember their first fight, took place in 2016, November 2016, with Benson Henderson losing a split decision to Chandler. That was in at Bellator 165. So really interesting rematch there. And before we talk about that, let's start first on the prelims a little bit with some of the interesting matchups here. I'll just sort of zoom through these and kind of give you my thoughts on some of these fights. Adam Borax is taking on Mike Hamill. This looks to me like kind of a setup fight for Borax to get back in the win column. If you remember, Borax was supposed to fight, I believe he was supposed to fight, was it Darren Caldwell? He was supposed to fight someone, I forget. And then they ended up moving that fight. It was Derek Campos. That's who he was supposed to fight as far as this card goes. And he had to withdraw in that fight. So Borax lost his last fight to Caldwell, looking to bounce back here, fighting a guy in Hamill who has way less fights. And I think Borax might be one of their best prospects at 145. He has that win over Aaron Pico. Give me Borax with the pick in that one. We've got an interesting women's fight between Valerie Loretta and Tara Graf. I interviewed Graf last week. She's ready to go. She knows she's being brought in to lose. I think she could go out there and potentially pull off the upset like we've seen before with other women's prospects with Bellator. So that'll be an interesting fight. We'll go all the way to the another interesting fight. We've got Christian Edwards taking on Ahmed Hefny. Edwards is a training partner of John Jones at Jackson Wink. This guy, if you remember, had a highlight reel finish last year. This guy's the real deal. I think he's going to get another win here and improve to 4-0 on that one. And then rounding out the prelims, we have a fight that I didn't even know was happening until I checked out this morning. AJ Agazarm, the Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz protege, taking on Chris Lecchione. I like Lecchione in this fight because I think he keeps it standing and outstrikes AJ Agazarm. If it goes to the ground, Agazarm has a little bit of an advantage, but Lecchione also has a pretty decent ground game. But I'll pick Lecchione in this fight just because he's got a lot more fights than AJ Agazarm, and I think he takes care of business. But let's get to the main card. Really cool fight in the lightweight division. Miles Jury, Georgi Karahakian moving up to 155 for this fight. Jury, the favorite. I'm a big Miles Jury fan. He lost the last fight to Benson Henderson, but I think he's going to go out there and get his first Bellator victory. Jury's a guy that, he had some setbacks in the UFC, but I think he was in the wrong weight class as far as that goes. Losing to Andre Fili, losing to Chad Mendez. Actually, he is coming off that win over Brandon Gertz in his last fight, and I think he'll continue that here. I think Jury is a guy you'll see fight for a Bellator title one of these days, and I think he gets it done here over Karahakian, who I like the move for him now, but at 35 years old, you had that brutal loss to AJ McKee last year. He is coming off a win over Paul Redmond in his last fight, which was also at lightweight, but I don't see him having the same success here over Miles Jury. Jury's younger, getting better every fight. Give me Miles Jury by decision in this fight. Another interesting fight in the welterweight division, Curtis Millender taking on Sabah Hamasi, a pair of UFC vets going toe-to-toe. I like Curtis Millender in this fight. He's a guy I don't think should have been cut by the UFC, even though he had a couple setbacks. This is a guy who had, highlight reel wins over Thiago Alves in the UFC. I like Millender in this fight. Hamasi gets hit a lot. I think Millender touches him and, gets a clean shot on there and knocks out Sabah Hamasi as far as that matchup goes. So give me Curtis Millender in that one. An interesting thing here is that Millender, this is the last fight on his sort of one and an option fight for Bellator. So Millender could potentially go back to the UFC if he wins this fight. So a lot on the line here for Millender. He could also re-sign with Bellator. I spoke to him recently. He basically told me, he's going to go where the money is. So if the UFC won't pony up, maybe the Bellator will as well. But I just don't see Sabah Hamasi doing anything that Curtis Millender hasn't seen. And I think Millender's fought way better competition. I think he goes out there and finishes Sabah Hamasi in the second round. Co-main event, we've got Matt Mitrione taking on Timothy Johnson, a pair of UFC vets. I think Mitrione gets the win by knockout in this one. I know that he is getting up there in age. He's 42 as far as that goes. Tim Johnson, not exactly a spring chicken as well either. Tim Johnson heading into this one at 35 years old, coming off that win over Tyrell Fortune, which was actually a bit of an upset. If you remember, I think Fortune was the favorite in that fight, but Mitrione has looked a lot better in my opinion. I know he's coming off the loss to Haratana, but I think in general, Mitrione goes out there, keeps him at range, and eventually gets either the knockout or the decision win in this one. But I really like Matt Mitrione in this fight. I love Tim Johnson. Great interview, but I think Mitrione's the better fighter. And the main event, the rematch between Chandler and Henderson. I like Michael Chandler in this fight. I think Michael Chandler is a guy that could realistically be on a really nice winning streak over the last couple fights. I know he lost to Patricio Pitbull, getting knocked out in the first round of that fight, but I think if they rematched a couple times, that could have gone either way. So here's a guy that really his only loss is he had the Brent Primus loss a couple of years ago. That was more of an injury, but in general, he's got some really solid wins, including the win over Henderson back in 2016. I don't see there being much of a difference there. Henderson is coming into this off the win over Miles Jury in his last fight and had the win over Piccolotti before that. But to me, Chandler's going out there and destroying his opponents, whereas Henderson's just sort of squeaking out decisions here. Chandler coming off a really nice win over Sidney Outlaw in his last fight, getting a first round finish in that one. Does he finish Benson Henderson? I think that's the big question. This actually isn't a 5-round fight. I was surprised to see that. It's only 3 rounds. I don't know if he'll finish Benson Henderson, but I think he'll win a decision in this one. Henderson's last stoppage loss was against Rafa dos Anjos way back in 2014. So I don't see Chandler going out there and stopping Benson Henderson, but I do see him winning a decision as far as this fight goes. So give me Michael Chandler by unanimous decision. I think he gets this fight, and I think he goes to the UFC after. You guys know that this is the last fight on Chandler's contract. I think if he was serious about signing with Bellator, he would have already re-upped. So I think he's going to head over to the UFC and join his buddies from Sanford MMA in the UFC's lightweight division. So we'll see what happens there. But I wanted to get onto something about Bellator. I love Bellator. I love what they do. I love the matchmaking. From a media perspective, they're one of the easiest promotions to work for. But I got some issues with them as far as them booking their fights, because this is a pretty good card. And it's actually, in some ways, some of the matchups on here are some of the better, are, in my opinion, better than some of the UFC fights that we're going to be seeing this weekend. But why do they, for whatever reason, I'm going to go off on a little rant here. Why are they so reluctant to announce fights? I don't get it, because I've talked to fighters. I've interviewed enough fighters where they've been like, yeah, I've known about this fight for a couple of weeks, but Bellator, for whatever reason, wants to send everything out in a press release and stuff gets lost. You're not a promotion in a position to do that, in my opinion. You want people to know about fights as soon as possible, and you want to promote them as soon as possible. So I get that you don't want, stuff to get out where you have, change up in opponents, or you have things where, things get a little bit weird as far as that goes, as far as, having, fight announcements not come to fruition. But I say, get the news out there as soon as you can. What do you got to lose? If anything, it's free promotion. It's better to get the word out there as far as the Bellator shows go and everything else. And they could use as much promotion as they want, especially with the fact they're doing this card on a Friday. It's not like they're going head to head with the UFC. So why not get people at home watching their card and getting the news out there a little bit sooner? So I'd like to see Bellator do a better job of announcing fights, really highlighting some of the fights that are on there, because I feel like a lot of times when I'm watching a Bellator card, some fights are flying under the radar. Like the fact that AJ Agazarm is on this card and on the prelims, and a lot of people didn't know about it, to me is criminal. He's one of their biggest stars for them. I know he doesn't have a great record, but push the Nick Diaz angle, that this is a guy that trains with Nick Diaz. Make people tune in just for that reason. I would just like Bellator to do a better job of promoting their fights and really letting people know, especially the media, people like myself, letting them know about the fight announcements sooner rather than later. Again, I know stuff can fall through and things like that, and I can understand it from that perspective. But the second you find out about a fight, just announce it and let's get talking about these cards, because I feel like this is a card that unfortunately is flying under the radar, and it shouldn't be, because it's a pretty solid card, even some of the fights in the prelims. So that's my rant on the Bellator card there. Let's keep things going here. We got a little bit of time left on the show. Really excited about Saturday's card, like I mentioned. We're going to just check here on the chat and see if we got any questions coming up here. I'm happy to answer them as we're sort of wrapping things up here on the show. Again, really excited about the Bellator card coming up here on the weekend. And we're just going to check here in the YouTube chat. I'm just getting a link up here, guys. And one thing I will talk about too is a lot of people have been asking me about the eye poke in the Edmund Shabazian fight. I don't think that had a huge impact on the fight, in my opinion. I think in general, I think Edmund's a guy that just wasn't ready for a Derrick Brunson as far as that goes. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I sort of talked about that before in my rant, where this was the right matchup for him. Could it have had an effect? Possibly, but I don't think it was going to change the outcome of the fight. Edmund got tired in that fight. Edmund was keeping his hands down at times. He shouldn't have been keeping his hands down. Those aren't because of an eye poke. That's just, it sucks. It sucks that it happened in the fight, but I don't think that was the reason that he got finished in the fight. He probably should have taken a little bit more time, but I don't think that was a huge, reason that he ended up losing that fight. So that's sort of how much I was sort of factoring in that. Let's check out the chat here a little bit. We got some more questions. We're wrapping things up here. Matt Bradbury saying Brunson versus Jack Till doesn't deserve a fight with Jack. He should fight the winner of Akhmedov or Weidman, or the winner of Romero versus Hall. I agree with you there, but still, he's got a 3-fight win streak. He just finished Edmund Shabazian. I think any one of those fights would make sense. You do bring up a good point that maybe we should wait for the Akhmedov and Weidman fight first. Then you could do Akhmedov and Brunson next if Akhmedov ends up winning that fight. They do have the same manager, so that would be an easy negotiation as far as that goes. They're both rep by Dominance MMA, but I don't think it's outrageous to suggest that Jack Hermanson fight Derek Brunson next, because who's Jack going to fight? He's not fighting Robert Whitaker. Jared Cannonier is going to fight him instead. So that leaves you with a few options. He could fight Darren Till, but again, I think with the UFC's interest in Darren Till, you might want to give him a fight that's a little bit easier to get him back in the win column. So I don't know if they go that route. So because I do think Brunson is a winnable fight for Darren Till as far as that goes. But I think Jack Hermanson would be a little bit more dangerous. So we'll see what they decide there. But I think we're going to sort of see what the UFC decides to do with their matchmaking. We've got the title fight booked. We've got Whitaker Cannonier booked. Let's see what happens after this. We got lots of time as far as that goes. So we got Denise Knowles in the chat. Good to hear from you, Denise. Always great hearing from you. She says Jocko has a fight booked for October. I did see that. Jocko coming off a big win in his last fight. So we'll see what they decide to do there. I think it's good that they're matching up these middleweight fights, like I said, to keep the ball rolling because, for the longest time, we didn't have Costa and Adesanya booked, and we were just sort of waiting to see the other matchups unfold. And now we finally have a lot of matchups coming into fruition as far as that goes. I also see Matt suggesting in the chat that Randy Brown fight Rocco Martin. Rocco Martin's not going to fight for a while. Follow his account on Instagram right now. He had a pretty serious infection from knee surgery. I don't think it's going to be a while before we see Rocco Martin back in the cage. It sounds like he's still got pain in that knee, and things are not looking too good as far as that goes. So I would recommend instead, a fight maybe with Randy Brown and I don't know. Let me just think of the welterweight division right now, who he could potentially fight, maybe a Frank Camacho fight at 170 or something, like someone where Randy Brown can have the opportunity to get back in the win column and a fight that he could win. Or even you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned Matt Brown there, but I think you're talking about Randy taking on Rocco Martin. I think Rocco Martin's a guy that, like I said, won't be back for a while. He might not even fight again this year, just kind of from what I'm hearing as far as that goes. Let's see what else we have here as far as other questions go. Max Holloway, not the real Max Holloway, he's saying they might make Till versus Jack, who's good wrestling versus good grappling. They could do that as well. If they want to get Darren Till back in the contender spot and they're not high on Jack Hermanson, they could do that fight as well. So we'll see what they decide to do with that. But I think they'll probably go with the side of giving Till someone that's a little bit easier to fight as far as that goes, because Hermanson's dangerous. We saw that in the last fight against Calvin Gastelum. Brutal finish for Martinez. Corner should have stopped the fight after round 2. I'm glad you brought that up, Nigel. Totally agree with you there. I think they definitely, Frankie Saenz' corner should have thrown it in. Frankie Saenz hadn't had a finish in a couple of years. So what are you doing trying to make him go out there for that third round? It wasn't looking good for him. So I totally agree with that. Might have taken a couple of years off his career with that as far as that goes. James, could you get in touch about the Contender Series? Didn't happen to miss it. I will have a video on my channel about that, but I'll quickly go through it here now for you guys. That Contender Series coming up here on Tuesday. I'll tell you who I do like on this card is Kenny Cross. Here's a guy who's 10-3, should probably be called up to the UFC already, but he's fighting a newcomer. I shouldn't say newcomer. They're all newcomers fighting on Contender Series, but he's fighting DeMonte Robinson, who is 6-1-1. Robinson's only loss is Devontae Smith, the current UFC lightweight, but Kenny Cross has turned a corner in this career. Here's a guy who's 3-2 to start his career. He's now 10-3. Super impressive guy. Training out of Michigan. He's one of these guys like Jamal Hill. A lot of these other Michigan guys we're seeing really make a rise and make some noise in the UFC. I think Cross is going to go out there and finish him, and he's also going to go out there and get the UFC contract. I'm really high on Kenny Cross. I'll mention the main event because I think this is really interesting. Dustin Jacoby. Does that name sound familiar to you guys? Because Dustin Jacoby actually fought in the UFC back in 2014. He went 0-2. He lost to Clint Hester and Chris Camozzi, a guy who he now trains with. And Jacoby then went to fight in kickboxing. Had a lot of solid competition in kickboxing. Fought Alex Pereira, the guy who knocked out Israel Adesanya in Glory. Fought Carl Roberson and ended up defeating Carl Roberson in Glory kickboxing. He's definitely seasoned, and he's a guy that is fighting a guy in Ty Flores who only has 9 fights. Like Jacoby's MMA record's 11-5, but he's got even more fights in kickboxing. I really like Dustin Jacoby in this fight, and he's a guy too that just because he hasn't been fighting in MMA for a while doesn't mean he's not getting that training in. I know Anthony Smith, for example, he's one of his main training partners, so expect Jacoby to go out there and get the UFC contract in what will be his second UFC stint if he does end up getting the win there. So I'll touch a bit on that, but like I said, if you guys look on my channel after this, I did a full breakdown of the entire card as far as that goes, so keep an eye out for that. Any other question, guys? We'll take some more questions as we're wrapping up here a little bit more. We've got some other questions coming in right now. Early predictions on Rosenstruik versus JDS. That's an interesting fight, and I'm glad you brought up Rosenstruik because we actually interviewed him on the channel last week. Rosenstruik's like, you know what? I don't give a crap that I'm fighting an American top team guy because they both train at the same gym. They have trained together in the past, but for Rosenstruik, it's all business. And, he lost to Ngannou in his last fight, but he'll be the first to admit it was just a mistake. And if you make one mistake against Nagano, you'll get knocked out. Just ask Curtis Blades. It's happened to him twice. So I think you'll see Rosenstruik go out there and look quite good. The thing with JDS that concerns me is that he's just taken so much damage in his career. While I think he's the better fighter on paper, I would have to pick Rosenstruik in that fight just because he's got that knockout power and he can knock you out at any point in the fight. Look at that Alistair Overeem fight where Overeem was winning the fight and then he knocked him out at the last minute. So I don't think that bodes well for JDS. JDS also looks a lot slimmer now, which I don't know if that's an advantage. Maybe he's losing some power as far as that goes, as far as him losing, maybe some strength in that. But the early pick on that one would be Rosenstruik, but I'll do a really long, in-depth look on that fight coming up here in a little bit when we're getting closer to fight time. But the early pick on that one would be Rosenstruik. Let's get a few more questions here, guys. Let's submit them in here. I should mention the interviews we got here on the channel that we've done over the last couple of weeks. We did Stephen Wonderboy Thompson talking about what's next for him and getting his thoughts on the Whitaker-Till fight, as well as his thoughts on the Masvidal and Usman fight. We talked to Chris Weidman last week, getting his thoughts on the Akhmedov fight. A lot of good insight with Chris that he's leaving New York. I was kind of surprised to hear that. He's moving away, moving close to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson because his sister, if you guys don't know, is married to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's brother. So he's trying to be closer to family, and he's going to be, and this whole camp pretty much was at, what's it called? Why am I blanking on the name of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's camp? It's kickboxing camp. I'll just look it up. It'll take 1 second here. But yeah, he's been training basically there the majority of his camp. And I think that that's going to be not bad because you're getting to work with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who's quite a good fighter. Because Longo's MMA back in New York, as far as I know, is not even open. So he's not getting a chance to do that. Upstate Karate, that's what I was thinking of. I can't remember everything all the time. So yeah, getting to work with Wonderboy sounds like he had a good camp, but as far as getting to work with Wonderboy and everything else. So we'll see how Weidman does in this fight. But yeah, good interview there. Goes into that, goes into changing management. He's with, I think, his third manager now over the last couple of years. He's with VaynerMedia. So really cool to hear how that all came together as well. So definitely check out the Chris Weidman interview that we have here on the channel. Is Gavin Tucker tough to get an interview with? Never much from Gavin online pre-fights. Yes, he is. I ended up reaching out to him a couple times. I even got in touch with someone close to him. I have his number, just doesn't message me back. So I tried to get something with Gavin, and then the last thing I heard was that he already did enough media and he's tapped out, which I haven't seen any interviews from him lately. So unfortunately, no interview from me with Gavin Tucker. But it's funny because I actually interviewed him when he made his UFC debut, and we did a couple interviews after that. But ever since then, he's been kind of like a ghost. He's tough to get a hold of. So I would have liked to talk to him to hear what type of camp he had, but again, I'm picking him in this fight, so he can't get mad at me in this one as far as that goes. Yeah, let's take a couple more questions, guys, as we're sort of getting things going here. I'm curious, actually, I'll throw a couple questions at you guys. What are you looking forward to this weekend as far as the fights go? Like, we've got Bellator, we've got Contender Series, we've got the UFC. What's fights really stand out to you, and what do you think about the card over the weekend? I thought it was pretty good despite all the wacky changes that took place with that. That's kind of interesting too. So we'll have to see how the UFC is handling the people that didn't get to fight on these cards. Like, what happens with Trevin Giles? Are they going to rebook the Holland fight? We'll see what happens there. I'll talk quickly about Chimaev, who everyone's been talking about over the last week. You guys remember Conor McGregor tweeted out, I accept, and everyone immediately thought that he was talking about Chimaev, and TMZ ran a story on it. That obviously Conor's not going to fight Chimaev. There's no upside to Conor fighting him. Chimaev's got 2 wins over 2 guys he was supposed to beat in the UFC. Let's slow the breakdown a little bit on Chimaev as far as him as a prospect. Could he fight for a title one day? Could he be a contender? I think he possibly could, but we got to see him fight some better competition as far as that goes. But people think he's going to fight Conor McGregor. That's nuts. McGregor's not going to come back and fight anyone. He's going to fight a Masvidal. He's going to fight a Nate Diaz. He's going to fight a money fight. Like, people think he's going to fight Poirier or anyone like that. I just don't see that happening. I think if McGregor's going to come back, he's going to fight someone that is top notch, and that's going to get him a big payday as far as that goes. So that's what I would sort of say as far as that goes. We've got my producer Jordan here in the chat saying, I don't think I've ever seen that many changes on the card. I agree. It's crazy to see what happened over the weekend, especially because it's like, really, like, this happens, like Trevin Giles faints like that one, or Gerald Meerschaert gets COVID. Like, just a lot of bad luck on that card. It reminds me of the UFC Calgary card a couple of years ago. Remember that main event was supposed to be Jose Aldo and Eric Koch, and Aldo didn't even end up fighting on the card and ended up being Renan Barão and Uriah Faber. That's the only card that I can think of in recent memory that had so many changes as far as that went, and it didn't end up being a good card either, but at least this one did. At least we got to see some finishes. We saw a couple upsets. We saw a lot of really cool things as far as that goes with that card. So, but solid card over the weekend, I must say. Like, I was definitely engaged in a lot of fights and a lot of nut shots as well too. That was not good for the fighters to see. So you guys got to keep those kicks a little bit lower here. So as far as that goes, guys, get a couple more questions in here, like I said, and we'll wrap things up. As far as other things going on in the news, you guys know this is more of like a news / recap / preview show as well. I see a story on MMA Junkie right now saying, will this be Cormier's fairy tale ending? I got to be honest. I've talked about this before. They do way too much promotion on Daniel Cormier for this fight. Stipe is the champion. They should be promoting him as far as that goes. So yeah, I kind of don't like that. And I don't like the fact that DC is still an active fighter and he does a show on ESPN. So of course people are going to favor him in the fight. Now I'm still picking Cormier in the fight, but I don't like the way he's being promoted as far as him getting more promotion over Stipe as far as that goes. So I don't know if you guys, if that's something you've noticed as well. Also might be getting an interview with Stipe this week, online movement. So keep your eyes tuned to this channel for that. I mean, we're scheduled to do it. It's probably going to happen, but if it doesn't, I just figured I'd let you know ahead of time, but going to get some good stuff there with Stipe on the weekend. I've been interviewing Stipe for years, so that should be good. Supposed to be interviewing him on Wednesday. So that'll be kind of interesting to hear what he has to say, especially since, if you guys remember, Stipe wanted to fight Cormier, but he's like, look, I'm not going to fight him if I don't have a proper camp. And he was, fighting fires, doing the firefighting thing during the day. And because of COVID, he wasn't able to train at his gym. So people are like, oh, he's scared and all this stuff. Of course, idiot fans saying this. It's like, look, the guy's not scared. He's risking his life every day being a firefighter, especially during COVID. And now, he's coming out and you're saying that he doesn't want to fight Cormier. Like, come on, like he wants a proper camp. You don't just take like a half-ass camp and fight Daniel Cormier. You guys realize what's on the line here for Stipe? Like his legacy's on the line. So is Cormier's. If Stipe wins this fight, he's going to go down as the best heavyweight in UFC history, at least from my perspective. You look at the title defenses, you look at who he's beat, Stipe would go down as the best heavyweight fighter in UFC history. If Cormier wins, he also gets that moniker. If he can beat the guy who had the most title defenses and defeat him twice in a row, then Cormier's got to be the best one. So why would he take a half-ass camp and go fight Cormier? Like, you guys are, come on, not all you guys. A lot of you guys are smart. You're like, hey, he needs a full camp. But some idiots out there are saying he's scared. Really? He's scared? Stipe Miocic is scared? Come on, guys. Let's lose it with that. So let's see what else we got here. Matt Bradbury says Edmund versus Jocko. No, Jocko has his next fight booked. I'm actually going to find out who he's booked against. Chris Toff Jocko. I'm totally going to spell that wrong in Tapologies. I'm typing it in, but it comes up. So who's Jocko fighting? He's fighting Magomed Murdiov. So he's already got a fight booked, Matt, unfortunately. I think Edmund's got to fight someone that's a little bit easier, like someone outside the top 15. Because I think if he fights anyone in the top 15 now, I'm not exactly confident he beats them, even though he's got some good knockouts and stuff. It's if he can't finish, like we saw over the weekend, if you can't finish your opponent early, it's a long fight for him. Like, I don't even know if he beats a Marvin Vettori, who's ranked 14 right now, right? I think you got to give him someone a little bit easier. Who does that look like? Actually, someone this morning on my podcast suggested Eric Anders. I think that makes sense. Anders is on a losing streak. It's a good fight to see where Anders fits in the division. And for Shabazian, I think it's a winnable fight for him. But nothing against Eric. I'm a big fan of him, but he's got to turn some things around. It's a good test for both guys. So I think Anders is the fight to do. Allen versus Carlos Jr. Brendan Allen, why is he out again? Oh, Allen's not going to fight for a while. I think he suffered it was an eye injury or something in the last win over Dawkins. So I don't think he's going to fight again this year. So Carlos Jr. will probably end up fighting someone else as far as that goes. I'll take a few more questions here, guys, as we're, like I said, wrapping things up. Like I mentioned, we had an interview with Chris Weidman last week. Check that out for this card. I had an interview with Alexei Oleinik. Also interviewed Aljamain Sterling recently. It sounds like he's going to get screwed out of a title shot. I don't like that at all. I went on a rant about this a little while back. It sounds like they're trying to do Marlon Moraes and Piotr Jan when I know Moraes beat Sterling, but like Sterling just put out like an A+ performance over Corey Sandhagen. He should not have to go and fight a guy like Moraes shouldn't get the title shot over him, despite the fact he had a win over him 3 years ago. Sterling's done way better than that as far as that goes. So, all right, guys, probably a good time to wrap things up. Tune in next week to this show. Monday. This is the first live show we've done, so I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully you guys can tune in every week live. Get your questions in. We'll definitely leave a question portion of the show at the end of the show. But this show is basically we talk some news, we do some recaps, we do some previews. It's a little bit of everything here on Octagon Outlook. The biggest thing, guys, is subscribe to the YouTube channel here at Line Movement. A lot of people have been asking me what happened with the Score channel, what happened to your big interviews. They're all going to live on here. Line Movement is getting my best interviews here on the channel. So if you guys are looking for my interviews with Colby and Kevin Lee and everyone else, definitely hit that subscribe button and definitely make sure you guys tune in as far as that goes, because that we're going to be putting some good interviews here. Like I said, supposed to be speaking with Stipe this week. Also supposed to be speaking with Chito Vera this week as well. So that's another big interview ahead of his fight with Sean O'Malley. So keep your guys' eyes locked here on this channel and make sure you subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. And like I said, subscribe to this channel. We're going to be putting out a lot of really great content. Also, shout out to Dan Tom and Dan Levy. They do a great preview show every week. Really good technical analysis by both guys. As you guys know, I'm not really a technical guy, more of a stats guy. So if you guys want another look when it comes to breaking down the fights, those two are your guy. Those two are your guys as far as that goes. And to me, Dan Tom is the best technical analyst in this sport. He does a great job with his breakdown. So I highly recommend go checking out their show. It's usually on Thursdays, but you just have to sort of follow Dan on Twitter to see when the show is actually going to go up and everything like that. So definitely keep that in mind as far as that goes. All right, guys, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for tuning into the live edition of Octagon Outlook. We'll be back next week, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Definitely got to tune into that. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Enjoy Contender Series tomorrow night, Bellator on Friday, and the UFC on Saturday. I will see you guys back here a week from today. Have a great rest of your week. This is James Lynch signing out.